All right, it's 3 minutes after noon, so let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Building Business Relationships with LinkedIn. Is this LinkedIn's moment? It's interesting to think about how old LinkedIn is and yet how new it is to a lot of people, and we're going to be digging into that paradox today and the questions and priorities that we should be addressing as we think about LinkedIn in our business and in our professional lives. My name is Doug Wendt. I'll be our moderator today. And before we get started introducing our panelists, I want to take a moment for some housekeeping items. So first of all, we are recording this event, and within 24 hours, everyone who is registered to attend or who is currently attending will receive a copy of the recording. So we'll make sure that you have that. In addition, we will also be publishing an edited version of this program on YouTube, and we'll make sure that you have that information in the future as well. Finally, if you have questions during the program, please submit them using the Q&A tool, which is one of the icons on the lower portion of your Zoom interface. Use the Q&A tool. That will allow us to review and organize and stage questions for our panelists. We will make sure to set aside time for questions from today's attendees. So again, welcome to the program, and let's begin with introducing our panelists for this exciting program. So let me begin with Bruce. Bruce Siegel is one of our three panelists today. He's an accomplished executive with a background with some of America's leading brands. You may have heard of them. Two that come to mind, MasterCard and Citibank. I'd like to think that I should be shareholders of them because they are certainly companies who are shareholders of me. Bruce has a BA from Yale and an MBA from Stanford. He has a practice that focuses on client engagement and thought leadership and LinkedIn for business, and he's presented on LinkedIn strategy to numerous business audiences. In fact, that's how Bruce and I met. So welcome, Bruce. In addition, we have Marissa Pulselli. Marissa is a writer, speaker, and educator. Her focus is bringing her passion for helping people find their authentic voice. She is an accomplished content developer and coach who helps people develop a powerful personal brand and an authentic voice for their professional commitment and personal vision. She's also an ATD credentialed coach, a script consultant for TEDx, and a self-described LinkedIn evangelist. So thank you and welcome, Marissa. And our third panelist is Chris Moore, the gentleman with the University of Texas logo on his back wall. Chris is a business development expert with a deep background in building channel partnerships, including his work with HubSpot, which is the company he works for today. Before that, he worked for Dell Computer and a number of other companies. The most important thing to know about Chris is his nickname is the Honey Badger because he has relentless tenacity in building business relationships. And he's also passionate about the power of technology to support sales and marketing and business development. So with that, we will open up the program and start our discussion with our panelists today. Let's begin with an interesting piece of history. LinkedIn was founded in the year 2002. That is 18 years. We are nearly 20 years into our journey with LinkedIn. I know I, for one, always thought of it as basically a resume on the web back in those days. I think a lot of people still do think of it in that framework, even though it's obviously much, much more than that and totally different in many respects. If that was our description for LinkedIn 20 years ago, what is our description for LinkedIn today? How should we be thinking about it? And we'll use this to frame up the rest of our discussion. And I'll start with Bruce, and then we'll go around our panel.
Thank you, Doug. Hope you can all hear me. Well, LinkedIn is really the place where professionals go to network online. There have been a lot of alternatives that have come forward, RelSci, RelPro, Alignable, even Facebook, before their troubles that they've had in the last couple of years, made a real play for the business audience. But with in-person networking, essentially on hiatus for the foreseeable future, LinkedIn is the place where professionals now go to network. So it's much, much more than a resume site.
Thank you, Bruce. And I'm going to come back to you and we're going to dig into what that means as a professional place to network. Marissa, how would you describe what is LinkedIn today?
Doug, I love that you started with this question because I believe that equating LinkedIn with the online version of your resume is actually the number one myth as far as LinkedIn is concerned. And contrasting an online version of the resume with what LinkedIn really is the perfect way to understand its true power as a platform. So resumes are curated, edited, targeted documents. LinkedIn, on the other hand, is a narrative platform. It's about storytelling. It's your place to get into not just what you do and what accomplishments you've achieved, but why you do it, what you're proud of, what your vision is. All sorts of information that creates a holistic picture of who you are as a person and a professional together. And that's what makes it such a powerful platform for what Bruce was talking about, the actual connection and networking. So it is the premier place to form meaningful connections.
Chris, you're the honey badger. You're the guy who is relentless about building, and I want to emphasize meaningful connections. I think Marissa said it beautifully. So what is your frontline perspective as someone whose job is to build business relationships every day? Listening to what Bruce and Marissa shared, how would you describe LinkedIn?
Yeah, I think I think they hit it on the head. I think something that I personally do myself and a lot of people here at HubSpot, we use LinkedIn to kind of understand what's going on in the market in different verticals and really kind of doing a lot of research on best practices, best tools to be using, a lot of outreach to customers. Obviously they started off as a platform that you could go find jobs, and you can still do that today. You can put your resume online, you can do those kind of things, but there are a lot of actually very unique tools within LinkedIn that can help you grow your business. And when you tap into those appropriately, you can see some huge growth. And then I think especially in like that automation, a lot of times people, they don't realize that LinkedIn has a bunch of automation that you can turn on to grow your business. So hopefully we can talk a little bit more about that later, but that's how we use LinkedIn. We use it as a tool to really like grow our business and then also understand best practices in different verticals.
So you bring up an interesting point, and I want to say to the entire audience that we want to balance our conversation between sort of two aspects of the picture. One is how I present myself on LinkedIn, and the other is how I engage and communicate and connect on LinkedIn, right? And one of the challenges I think people have in getting started is, honestly, it's a lot to learn just to figure out how to properly present yourself, right? And so, I think people get stuck on that first step because it becomes so overwhelming. What are some of the things that you in your experience tell people, look, if you have a LinkedIn profile, but it's probably out of date, it's dusted off, you haven't really done anything at the business level, it's all been on the individual level, but even that's been limited. How should I get out of that rut? What are 2 or 3 things that I should do to level up how I present myself? And then from there, we're going to talk about how to engage. But we'll start with presenting. And Chris, if you want to start with that, and we'll go back around.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a good question. I think it's interesting. Before this webinar, about a week ago, I was looking online and I found there's some really like good unwritten rules published out there on LinkedIn that people should go and search for. And a couple of the rules that stood out to me that I thought were interesting is, and it's so true because I see this all the time. I see personal profile pages that are really written well and do a good job describing that person's background. And then I see pages that are almost kind of too boastful. And that's one of the unwritten rules that LinkedIn says is like, don't go on and be too boastful about yourself. Make sure it's classy. They recommend working with people that can write this kind of stuff professionally. So I thought that was interesting, but there's some really cool unwritten rules to look through before you go and just throw something up online. Because remember, millions of people are going to see this. And so you really want to like take your time and nail it down right, and not just throw anything up there. So yeah, I would just give the tip to everybody, go search for the unwritten rules of LinkedIn. Make sure you read those before you put anything up online.
So Marissa, this kind of feeds right into, I know what you focus on a lot. And I want to emphasize, it's fascinating to me. You do provide, you're a person who works in one of the areas of your practice with people on their resume and on those very traditional structured tools for career development and communication. But you've suggested that even if my primary focus on LinkedIn is career oriented, let's just take that for a moment, and then we'll move into the business side of the discussion in a little bit. That doing this on LinkedIn is not just copy and paste at all. In fact, it's a different voice, a different approach, and I think that's what Chris is trying to allude to with some of what he's talking about. Can you give some thoughts in a nutshell? Well, what does that mean? Like when someone starts over here in resume land, and they expect that you're just sort of going to recreate that on LinkedIn, what are the things they need to understand or that you tell them or elicit from them to start having a meaningful discussion about how to build a presence and a platform for oneself on LinkedIn?
Yes, absolutely. And they are really night and day, the difference between resumes and LinkedIn profiles. And it can feel very overwhelming. So what I like to tell people who are just starting to make that transition from the world of bullet points and resumes and not even writing in full sentences is, number one, to make it personal, like literally write it in first person. So you think about your traditional resume, it's written in third person, or it might not even have pronouns in it at all because you're doing phrases and sentence fragments in bullets, right? But your LinkedIn profile is meant to be written in first person. And it's meant to be more conversational, definitely classy, as Chris alluded to, but more conversational in tone, as though you were sitting down with a friend over a cup of coffee or your beverage of choice and talking in a professional way about what you believe in, what you stand for, where you are in your career, what you're looking forward to.
I'm going to actually challenge you on that. And I challenge you because I agree with you. But I'm thinking to myself, people have spent 20 years talking about their career in resume formatted language, even verbally, because we all sort of have been taught that an interview is essentially verbal representation of a resume. I am sure people really get stuck when you try to have this conversation with a client. Let's talk about, what is your vision? What kind of story do you want to tell? That's a totally different way of thinking. What are one or two things that you do to get people out of that rut and get them thinking about, how do I start thinking about my career as a story, is really what I'm asking.
Yeah, it is a complete paradigm shift. You're right. It's more than just relaying different information in a different style. It's completely shifting your mindset. So for me, when I work with individuals, a lot of that is accomplished in the intake process, which has questions that are aimed at drawing out that information. And then I talk with the client about it and I coach them through it. So in a strategy session, I'll begin to elicit some of that information and get them thinking along those lines. And something that I always ask them to do is to think about, what is the golden thread that runs through all of their experiences? So for example, for me, I've been a teacher. I've worked in healthcare as a patient advocate. I do writing services now, right? Content development. But for me, the common denominator, that golden thread, has always centered around voice, helping people find their voice, helping people stand up for themselves. So when I can latch on to what it is in me that's really important, I can use that as an anchor to sort of inform the rest of the conversation. And it serves as a baseline for the story. It's sort of like a spine that can run through the whole story and the connecting thread. And it becomes easier for people to tell the story of their career as a story rather than a series of disjointed bullet points, when they know what the connecting glue is that holds it all together.
So this reminds me of something I remember learning in journalism class in college, which is, in order to write good journalism, you have to know what your perspective is. You have to have a perspective. Anything that I write that I want other people to read has to have a perspective. Like, why am I doing this? So really this goes to the point of whether I'm on LinkedIn for myself as an individual professional or for my business, I have to decide what that perspective is. Otherwise, I'm just going to be sort of sounding very me too. You know, Bruce, I know that you work a lot with professional firms, as do I, in your consulting, and you've worked with a lot of people who I'm sure have in their careers, they've done their professional messaging as an attorney or as a CPA or as a management consultant the same way. This is a very new medium, even though it's been around for almost 20 years. For a lot of people, stepping into this environment is pretty much a shift in thinking. How do you help them think about the arc of their profession and their thought leadership in a context that will create that perspective that will make their LinkedIn engagement effective?
Well, I agree with everything that Chris and Marissa have said. The other thing that they have to make a transition from the world of the resume, or if they're an attorney, which is all word-based, into the LinkedIn environment, which is so much visual-based. So like a lot of people are accessing LinkedIn not on a desktop or a laptop, but on their phone.
On their phone. Right.
And so it's so critical the way that you craft the story, to in addition to getting the storyline right and having that authentic voice in the words, you figure out how you transition that into visuals, which is a difficult transition for someone like an attorney to make. And so and I'm sure Marissa does this too, I work with clients to see, well, what kind of visual, would you be comfortable with? That's above your profile picture. There's a banner section. LinkedIn about 3 months ago added a feature section, which is just visuals, and it can link to your website. It can be videos, but thinking about how the story translates from words, like a resume, then into the words for your LinkedIn, and then into these visuals is really critical. And I really try to encourage people on this webinar to really push yourself, not just to get the words right, but to make sure that the visuals right and you have the right foundation for the things that we're going to be talking about for the rest of this webinar.
So this brings up another really important point that I know all of you are alluding to. This is not purely a written medium. It is certainly a narrative medium, and writing is a critical skill, but it is not just a written medium. Let's explore that a little bit. What are some of the other things that I should be thinking about in terms of, okay, if I'm going to engage and create, communications and involve people, and we're going to dig into some of that in further detail, but okay, you told me it's a narrative medium. It's not just writing. What else is it?
You want me to take that? And
go for it. We'll start with you, and then we'll bring it back around to
that's another one of the huge changes in LinkedIn since 2002, even 2010, 2014, is the importance of visuals. So, for example, there's something that's been in test, is being rolled out now, called LinkedIn Live, which is just like Facebook Live, but it enables you to do, just like we're doing an event here, to do an event on LinkedIn and then promote it through LinkedIn events. And then you can, it's about 2-3 years ago, you can, if you're not quite up to that, you should be posting videos, inline videos. There's a lot of options from your phone. You can send a voice message, you can post a video. It's all around different forms of communication that you have to learn to master. And again, your communication with the LinkedIn network is well beyond just words, but there are all these different media that you have to consider that are available to you to build your brand, and you have to consider what are you willing to tackle, what's within your comfort zone, and how do you push yourself. For someone like myself, push myself to be more visual, to record videos, post them on LinkedIn, because otherwise you're going to seem a little bit old-fashioned if you're just sticking with the words.
So, and that brings us back to what kind of voice I'm bringing. That voice is communicated not only through what I say, but how I say it.
Right.
Absolutely. Marissa, your thoughts on this issue, and then we'll go to Chris.
Yeah, building on what Bruce said, in addition to using various formats and different media for communicating, you also want to be really diligent and resourceful in building out a robust profile, the media that you incorporate into your profile itself can make a huge difference in transforming it from something that's very average and ho-hum and not engaging to something that really can be interactive. So LinkedIn has incorporated many different areas where you can actually integrate media. It used to be that that was attached to the About section, but LinkedIn pulled that out. And now there's actually a featured media section below your About section. And you can link there videos, you can link articles, you can link to websites, images, you name it, you can link to it. You can either upload a file or insert a URL. And there's sort of a gallery that people can see. You can also attach media to your job experiences and to certain accomplishments. So I really encourage people to be resourceful and consider, you know, have they produced any videos that they would like to be featured on their LinkedIn profile? Have they been mentioned in a publication? Have they written any publications? Have they been a podcast guest? You can link to a radio interview, a TV interview. Any place that you've been featured or that you've led a discussion, these are all types of media that can live in your LinkedIn profile on a more permanent status. And certainly as you get new ones, you can switch them up. But beyond the posting, there's a more permanent place, a more permanent home for a media-rich profile.
Chris, your thoughts on this? And then I've got a follow-up question for the group.
I mean, Bruce and Marissa just killed it. They stole everything I was going to say. But there's one thing that they didn't say that I think is interesting that I found is, I don't know if a lot of folks on this webinar know, but you can actually do SlideShare presentations within LinkedIn. So if you're using this as a business tool to create awareness around products or services, there's some really interesting ones that I've seen, even in just doing my research for the webinar. Some really interesting presentations. That's under SlideShare if you're not familiar with it.
Which was acquired by LinkedIn, just to be clear, right? It's part of the LinkedIn organization.
Yep. So it's pretty cool just to, I mean, obviously you want to put a good presentation out there. I've seen some awful ones, so don't put the awful ones up. But if you've got a really solid one, definitely put that up.
You've heard it from the honey badger, folks. That's definitive. So this brings out one of the questions that was right there in the event invitation that we sent out to folks. How much time should I be spending on LinkedIn, and how should I spend that time, and what should I be expecting? I know we could have a whole webinar series just to answer that question, but let's just talk about it in the context of maybe two audiences. You know, there are probably three primary audience or focuses we tend to think of for LinkedIn. There's the recruiting side, there's the sales and business development side, and the professional development side. For this session, let's put the recruiting off in its own little space, and let's talk about business relationship development and professional and career development, right? How do I fit or build a LinkedIn flow? You know, it's because I'll just say this from my own experience. You know, LinkedIn is not, it's in its own little intersection. It's its own hybrid between a social media platform and a publishing and communications environment. And it needs, in my experience and perspective, a lot more focus. In other words, I can't just throw something. I don't want to just throw something out there and say, look, I published it to LinkedIn. Okay. This requires thought. This requires curation. How do I go about the process of creating time and a discipline to make LinkedIn a meaningful part of my business life? And I'll start with Bruce on that one. Then we'll go to Marissa and Chris.
Well, that's a great question. And I just had published an article recently on can you do LinkedIn on 15 minutes a week? And I got some double takes saying, do you mean 15 minutes a week or 15 minutes a day? And I think if your focus is 15 minutes, then you're really talking about some limited branding ability. So you'll gain some branding benefit. You'll get your name out there. You'll keep yourself in front of your connections to some extent. And something is better than nothing. But if you really want to develop, uncover, reconnect with connections with people that you used to work with, which I think is one of the huge benefits of LinkedIn, and really do relationship development and even prospecting in a concerted manner to develop and uncover relationships and ultimately business, I think it takes significantly more than 15 minutes a week or even a day.
Or even a day.
Yeah, I think it's really, and Chris can go into this in more detail, but it's really a methodical approach where you're spending substantive time every day or almost every day, working your LinkedIn network, having a sense of who you want to connect with, what industries, what demographics, and then going after that in a methodical way.
Now, you brought up, I'm sorry, go ahead, Chris.
Go ahead, Doug. Go ahead.
You brought up two things that I know I promised to pass the baton to Marissa. I will, but there are two things that just absolutely, I think are worth exploring further. The first is I talked about the two paths, right? The business development path and the career development path. And you talked about networking and building your network. And the reality is that the actions are the same. Like we tend to think, and this is something I know Marissa will want to comment on, we tend to think salespeople reach out to people and connect with them, and career people who are focused on their own professional development don't. In fact, that's wrong. We all need to be building a network, and I want to dig into what that means. And then the second thing I'm going to come back around is something that I know Chris will have thoughts on, which is as a business person, I personally am obsessed with having absolute alignment between the business relationships that I track and maintain in other environments, my CRM system, my iPhone, my list of my relationships in other places, and LinkedIn. It unnerves me, the idea that there is a gap between my LinkedIn network and just my network. And I'm still working on the question of how do I bring all that together? So we're going to dig into these two pieces. Marissa, what are your thoughts on this issue of whether or not I am an entrepreneur or a leader of an organization where I'm responsible for revenue generation? Whether or not that's the case, is it important for me to be building a network and reaching out to new people on LinkedIn?
Absolutely. And it's not more or less important for either of those two categories. It's essential for both. And as far as the timing goes, look, you get out of something what you put into it, right? So if you're going to invest 15 minutes a week, 15 minutes a day, you will get a limited return on investment. What I like to suggest is to start with a bare minimum of half an hour a day and see where that gets you. And ideally that could even be bumped up, but I'm trying to be realistic and understand that not everybody has that much time to dedicate. But what I want to say further is that half hour or that hour or whatever you're able to contribute daily should encompass two main things. And the first thing it should encompass is your contributions. So this is original posts that you're creating or the sharing of curated information. The other thing that needs to be really carefully paid attention to is how you are contributing to your network. How are you supporting them? Are you liking and commenting on other people's posts? Are you sharing things? So there's an etiquette with LinkedIn, and it has to do with sort of just being a mensch, right? Just being a good person who goes and tries to not just make it all about you, but show that you're part of this virtual community. And I'll end with one tip that I offer, and it's something I do myself. Every month I go on LinkedIn and I do a virtual kindness spree. I go over a chunk of my contacts that I haven't gone over before, and I go on their profile and think, how can I support this person? Can I give them a recommendation? Can I endorse them for a skill? Can I share something that they've done recently? Can I send them a message? How can I connect with them? How can I support them? And yes, that does oftentimes return something to me, but it also puts some goodness into the online world, which is something I think that we all want to be contributing to.
Yes. Let me pass it over to Chris and then back to Bruce and focus on the following. Okay, if I'm going to spend time building my network, as well as, so building is both engaging, which Marissa just, I think, very rightly emphasized. If other people who I'm connected to on LinkedIn are contributing content, updates, and information, I should engage with that and basically spend time connecting in that regard. In addition, what about the reaching out and the being reached out to? You know, and I'm actually taking this from one of the questions that we've already received. You know, there are lions like LinkedIn open networkers, people who, you know, have a policy of accepting all requests to connect because they believe in the power of the networker effect. Other people are much more strict. And of course, the reality is LinkedIn changes their tune as a company about twice a week on this matter. Just depends on what part of the site you read and what book you bought. So what is your take on the networking side of it? Connecting with new people. You know, Bruce, you brought up a great point about connecting with people you used to work with. That I think is an enormously valuable vein to be mined. But how do I start thinking about building my connections?
Well, you brought up a couple of great points. The first piece is when people invite you, and I know that was one of the questions, do you accept or not? And typically what I find people do, their instinct is either to accept or just ignore. And what I try to stress to folks is that that moment when someone invites you is your moment to draw out a connection. So many of us have, you know, thousands of connections. So once they become one of those connections, then it's not as easy they sort of go into a pile, but use that connection moment to ferret out a relationship. So what I do is rather than 2 buckets, I create 3. People that I automatically accept, in which case I'll message them and again, draw out some element of why they connected now and glad to be connected. People that I ignore, there is, you know, groups of people that I just, you know, not going to spend my time with. And then those in the middle that I kind of like, that's interesting. And so what I do there is I send a message before accepting or ignoring their invite. LinkedIn on the desktop allows you to do that. And so I ferret out, Doug, it's great to hear from you. Thanks for connecting. I was just curious why you invited me to connect. And I usually like to speak to people on the phone before connecting. So I invite you to a conversation, which I find that I want to have meaningful connections, not just someone that I, you know, sort of know in only in the most vague passing way. And so that draws out and can be the beginning. And then sometimes it's just a polite 5 or 10 minute conversation, but sometimes that can be the beginning of a relationship. So I've had business partners that I've met that way, clients, people that have referred just from something as simple as questioning an invite. And particularly in this time when a lot of us are still working out of our home offices, I'm finding more resonance with that. People are willing to engage and talk.
Let me just throw one follow-up to that, Bruce, and I'll let you continue if that's okay.
Sure.
You said something that really hit me like a 2x4. You converted that process from the emphasis being on the connection, which is like, when I say, I mean the technological connection, that your record and mine are now connected in the LinkedIn database, which is kind of where all the framework of the conversation has historically been. And you turned that into relationship. And I know that maybe sounds obvious to this panel, but that is a revolutionary statement that you made, because you're not saying, do I know you or not know you? You're not saying, you know, do I want you or not want you? You're taking it out of that binary connection context, and you're saying, let me take a moment and learn a little bit about you. You learn a little about me. Let's see how can we develop a business relationship? And if there's a foundation to develop a business relationship, even if we didn't know each other before, then let's actually connect on LinkedIn. The connecting becomes not the decision, but the result of a decision.
Right.
And that's a huge shift. I just wanted to point that out because for my homework, that's a huge takeaway. Go ahead. I know you had another point you wanted to bring in there.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring, and I'm sure Marissa and Chris are going to have lots to say on this, but just that was sort of the incoming. And now in terms of proactive, one of the things that I like to do that LinkedIn allows you to do, it's totally available to all members is when I travel places, I go and I say, I wonder who went to school with me that lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. And that can be done very easily on LinkedIn. And so that's a great opportunity to just reach out to people that, maybe you vaguely knew you lost touch with, and it just sorts it really, easily. And it's great. And even if, I have a daughter in San Francisco, we're just there for a couple of days. We may not, really have time to have coffee with people, but at least to be able to say, Marissa, I just was, visiting San Francisco. I ran across your profile and I, just love to, reconnect. I thought of you because I was in San Francisco. So it seems, again, you're using like the intelligence on LinkedIn to rediscover and build relationships based on a commonality. And it's an amazing algorithm, and I'm sure Chris is going to get into this, in more detail, that LinkedIn has to enable people to connect. And you can use it, in so many different ways, even a simple way like I outlined, or through, Sales Navigator, which is much more sophisticated, and I'm sure Chris is going to talk about that.
Marissa, I want to follow up on what Bruce is describing, which is really a way of thinking about building real business relationships where LinkedIn is the medium or the starting point, right? And so one of the things you talked about was making sure that you're engaging with the content of the people who you're connected with. How do you choose? Do you have certain people that you are at the top of your list? I want to make sure I engage with their content. And this is going to lead into a discussion with Chris, really about targeting, and we'll get into that in a minute. But, how do you focus your energy? If I know I've got, 45 minutes and I want to have that back and forth connectivity, how do I focus on, how do I decide who to engage with?
So certainly there are people who their name and you actively pursue them. If you have listened to a podcast and someone comes up, someone was interviewed, you read a book, one major source of connections for me has been events, both in-person and virtual events. So for example, anyone who signed up for this webinar knew who the panelists were in advance and could have sent a connection request to any of us, right? So if you are going to participate in any kind of event, conference, whether it's in person or virtual, look up who will be contributing to it, who might be attending that is of note, and see if you can make a connection ahead of time to get yourself on that person's radar and maybe see if there's a way for that to be meaningful. Beyond that, I also filter out. So an easy way to filter out is if you get a request that is from a company that maybe doesn't align with your values, that doesn't align with your mission. There are certain ways that you can give. I agree with Bruce. For me, it's usually not a binary yes or no when I get a request, but every once in a while it is. So sometimes I can filter out if I see that the presence isn't in alignment with what I'd want to be associated with. But for the most part, I have my own targeted, and I don't even like the word targeted, but desired contacts that I would like to make a connection with. And then I filter and invite conversation with people who are requesting from me, keeping in mind that I have my own values and my own vision that I want to be true to.
So a question that one of our attendees asked that fits right into this: do you cull your list of connections? Do you go through periodically and say, some of these people should not be in my circle anymore?
I do.
Or is that, okay, go ahead.
I do. I have, sometimes that comes up organically in my discovery of what people post. If I see something that is, more of a rant than professional. If I see something, this is a very politically charged time that we're living in, and there's a certain way that I want to be in the world, and that as a business person, I want my company to be in alignment with. And if that is not a way that a contact is portraying themselves, it might be time to cut ties, or maybe if I feel that some good could come of it, reach out to the person privately and have a conversation about it. But I will also go through periodically and see who I have not heard from in ages, who don't seem to have much in common with, and reach out and simply say, hey, we're connected on LinkedIn, but we haven't really had a conversation in a while. I'd love to hear what's going on with you and if you're still interested in, furthering our relationship. And you can really reignite some great relationships that way. And you can also free up some ones that it's time to let go.
So this brings us to a couple of intervening points that we're going to hear from Chris on next. And that is, we're talking about a lot of things that take time. There are a lot of companies peddling tools and automation systems and third-party capabilities. LinkedIn itself has paid editions. This can get really expensive really fast. And the question is it worth it? And what should I be considering? Chris, you're a power user in the sales environment. What's the value proposition in your mind for going from free to a paid edition of LinkedIn? And then we'll talk about some of these third-party tools and this larger ecosystem.
Well, yeah, I love the paid tools. We're all made of money over here in Tennessee. Just kidding. But really, there's some amazing paid tools out there in regards to automation. Some tools that are not made by LinkedIn, like there's some automation tools that allow you to find the ideal client. You can put the results that you want to get out of there, and it can kind of auto start loading those connections up so that you can focus more time on selling, more time on doing the things that are important to kind of close business. So I like some of those tools. I think that they can get, I've been on the wrong end of some of those, and I've seen some, again, terrible automation, and it's a turnoff. And so it makes me not want to work with that company. But then I've also seen some really unique ones. Also in regards to like responses. So auto responders, someone makes a connection and I say, yeah, that's, let's connect this. This sounds, this is interesting to me. And then they have auto responders, again, trying to kind of work that lead to get it to a point to have a real kind of meaningful conversation. So I like that. And then LinkedIn has obviously Sales Navigator. So if you've never used Sales Navigator, it's a neat tool. You can start to really target the people that you want to reach out to. You can start to get notified when they make posts so that you can comment and you can start building relationships that way. I think that's really important. I did want to say one quick thing too on the amount of time that we talked about earlier, like what's the right amount of time? Because Bruce, I think was dead on. So for me, I actually I block my calendar every morning because what I noticed is I was letting it fall by the wayside. And so I block my calendar every morning and I just call it prospecting. But in that kind of 2-hour period, it's like checking emails. It's like making sure that I'm, using the tools that I need, but it's also spending time building political capital on platforms like LinkedIn. I think if you don't put the time on your calendar, you can let it fall by the wayside, and 15 minutes a week is certainly not enough in this day and age, especially with us all working from home. So that's my 2 cents on that.
And what do you all make of my contention that it takes a lot of work, but that it's important to have your LinkedIn network and your network be the same? And again, I don't hear that from a lot of people, and I'm not saying it's the only way to do it. It's just my strong preference. My philosophy is if I'm connected to someone on LinkedIn, I want to be engaged with them outside of LinkedIn. And if I'm engaged with someone outside of LinkedIn, I want to be engaged with them in it. But what are your thoughts? Am I overemphasizing something that's not really that important? Or is it really a critical consideration? I'll open that to the group. We can start with you, Chris, and explore from there.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question because it depends on how you want to use the tool, because it almost kind of starts with the first question that you asked, which is like, what is LinkedIn? Like trying to understand like how it started and where it's come. So it really depends on how you use it. So someone like you might feel that way. Someone like me, it's like I want to have the most connections that I can, so that I can have the largest reach, as a salesperson, right? So from a sales view, I pretty much accept everybody. Now, I actually do what Marissa does. If I start to see rants or things that I don't personally agree with, holler at you, see ya, we'll delete them super quick. But for the most part, I want the largest reach that I can get. And so, I pretty much will connect with anybody. And, I don't have the
He
most, but I've got
accepted mine, so it's
yeah,
true. You'll
accepted yours.
connect with just about
That's right.
anybody.
Yeah, I've got only 3,000 connections on there, and some people might go, "Wow, that's a lot." I don't know 3,000 people well enough to have that, and some people might go like, "Oh, that's nothing." And I certainly don't talk to those 3,000 people every year. That's for sure.
Right.
So, anyways, that's just my 2 cents.
So, Bruce, what is your take on this whole, your network of relationships in LinkedIn and your network of relationships outside of it? The same, different, overlapping, like a Venn diagram, but not identical. What's your take?
I mean, my take is that I want it to be as overlapping as possible because even people that I know very well, I'll still go back to their LinkedIn profile when I want to check like where they went to school, what year. I'm great about trying to be a connector and so to see if they go to school the same year as this other person, so that LinkedIn is a valuable resource even for people that I know very, very well. Having said that, there are people in my network, for example, an old boss, says a milestone birthday tomorrow, he's not on LinkedIn. So, there's going to be exceptions.
Right. Right. But you bring up something that I think is worth really bookmarking, and maybe for a future webinar in our series, we cover this, which is the enormous amount of value added information that I can learn to build better relationships. So not just market intelligence on people I don't know, which is important,
Right.
and is really the emphasis in Sales Navigator is how do I find people who meet my target criteria? But also, Bruce, you keep bringing up almost without thinking great ideas for how to get to know someone better.
Right.
Their networks, their relationships, the organizations they're involved in, important milestones, educational institutions. I'm an American University grad out of DC. I have connect with people on LinkedIn where our only commonality started with that. And it's built into what I would describe as a full-featured business relationship. And I've had other people, I didn't know we both had other things in common, worked for companies that are now part of the same parent, or had careers that in, previous careers, we were actually in very similar industries, or other things that help build richness.
Right.
So you've
Right.
really emphasized spending time getting to know the people I already know, as well as finding new people.
And it can take you, so I think that I'm probably on the edge of introverted, but it can take the perception using the intelligence of LinkedIn to sort of push you over the edge into the extrovert category. So it's really helpful.
So I am actually weaving questions that the audience is providing into our discussion. So I'm just going to mention, since we've got 10 minutes left, if you have a question, fill it out in the Q&A, and I will try to weave it into the discussion in our remaining time. Chris, I'm going to pop this back to you for a minute. One of the questions is, what is in fact, we can all cover this, but I want to start with Chris. I've got my personal profile, and then there's a business page for my company, right? I know some people, particularly entrepreneurs who maybe are solo practitioners, where they use their personal profile essentially as their company page, right? So I've seen people kind of do all of it as one. What's the difference? And why is it important to build a business presence for my company as well as an individual one? And Chris, you work for a company that pretty much is the gold standard in building an online presence for your team. So what are some of the things that you've gotten out of being a HubSpotter in the LinkedIn world that you wouldn't have gotten just by being you?
Yeah. Well, I definitely think that you should separate them 100%, without a doubt. Just, it makes sense. Having them together, to me, just every time I see that, I'm kind of like, not a big fan of that, personally. And the reason why I think you should separate them is because, you have different conversations on different pages. I mean, essentially that's what it boils down to. You should be having different conversations. And I think something that you'll find when you look at the like unwritten rules is you have to be really careful on that personal page, how you portray yourself. You have to really think through that, because a lot of times people will come and look at both pages, and if they can't align with you personally, they can sometimes have a hard time aligning with your business. And so I think it's really important to kind of to drill into those two and make sure that they're both sharp, and make sure that you're not on the personal side saying off the wall comments, right? And doing these rants, because then they'll tie that back to your, how you are as a business. But yeah, I think they should totally be separated, 100%. I think we do a good job here at HubSpot, and it's, you know, I say that very humbly, but it's funny, like here we have to basically be trained on what you say on your personal page and what you say on the business page, right? Because it reflects on the company. And there's a whole training around that, and there's a lot of emphasis on getting that right. So it's just something to be cognizant of.
Bruce, let me pop it over to you with a connecting thought. One of the things that we talk a lot about in our work with clients is making sure that all of the company's business contacts across the organization are connected at least somewhere. And our goal is actually 2 separate connections on LinkedIn with people inside the company, so that that ecosystem is balanced. You know, what are your thoughts on the network effect within a company? You know, for example, I know that in like HubSpot's case, you know, at the higher ends of Sales Navigator paid edition, you're able to take a contact you want to reach out to and look across your whole team of coworkers and see who may be connected to that person, or only 1 or 2, you know, hops away. What are some of your insights on that whole network effect for companies, including small businesses?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely there's a lot of great features in Sales Navigator and the Enterprise Edition, but even for smaller companies, there's something called Teammates, which you can, from the company page, it's essentially a way to prioritize people who are employees of the company, so that they're notified of either the company's posts or of each other's posts, and it's a way to prioritize and get that multiplier effect. And this is available, you know, for very small businesses.
So well, LinkedIn Teammates, a key tool to explore and learn about.
Yeah.
Another thing I know we want to make sure we at least touch upon, and that a couple of people asked about, is recommendations. You know, and it's actually, it's on my list to improve, is to ask for recommendations. Marissa, your thoughts on making that connection? You know, am I imposing upon people? Should I make it a habit? You know, how do I go about building a recommendation strategy, and why?
It's not an imposition. That's one of the things this platform is for. It is critical, and it is just as critical for you to give as well as request recommendations. So be a person who, if you give an unsolicited recommendation to someone, that's huge. That has a lot of clout to it and really help further a relationship. As far as requesting recommendations, be personal about it. The same way that you would be personal about asking for a connection request, ask for a recommendation with a personal note. Don't just click ask so-and-so for a recommendation. Include a personal note and make it easy for them to write the recommendation for you. Remind them of what you worked together on or how you were connected, and let them know what key points it would be most meaningful to you for them to include in that recommendation, so that they're not floundering and thinking, oh, this is this big project and I'm kind of directionless in how to write it. You will get a better recommendation and a greater likelihood that they'll do it if you ask with a personalized request and you do it in a way that spells out kind of what you want from them.
So again, what I keep hearing, and I'm putting in my own notes, is set aside time, make it a discipline, and then don't do anything that isn't personalized. Don't ever just hit the automatic button. Even if I'm using tools like Chris talked about that may help me be more time efficient, that time efficiency shouldn't be used to be impersonal. It should be used to be precise. You know, and so Chris, I'm going to pop it over to you with our closing question, which is, you work for a company that sells CRM software, and I'm honored to have you as a partner, and we implement HubSpot for lots of clients for sales and marketing. What are some of the reasons I want to consider integrating LinkedIn with my CRM system?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first of all, something to call out. We have an integration here at HubSpot and other CRMs. There's a lot of great CRM companies out there. So obviously I'm fond of HubSpot. That's why I work here. But there are platforms that you can integrate with Sales Navigator. And it's just nice to be able to have, in your CRM to be able to communicate through Sales Navigator, through that platform, have that integration tie in because you're most likely already going to be in the CRM. It's a time saver, number one. Number two, a lot of times when people are making connections on LinkedIn, they're spending the time on LinkedIn. If they don't have a process in place, a CRM of some sort, whether it's HubSpot or not, then a lot of things can kind of slip through the cracks. They can forget to follow up with people. They can, lose track of contact information. So it's just nice to be able to have it all in one place, to have your CRM connect with LinkedIn at the same time saver, and then also keep track of tasks. That's kind of what it boils down to for me.
We are at the tail end of what has been an incredibly exciting power hour on LinkedIn. I have a couple housekeeping items as we wrap it. First, closing thoughts. Bruce, closing thoughts. One or two key tips that you want everyone to walk away with.
I mean, I think that really what we've been saying, it's really, I'd say two things. One, whatever your time slot and your commitment, just keep it disciplined. So whether it's, the 2 hours that Chris said, or maybe it's just really a half an hour on Sunday morning when there's no interruptions, put it in your calendar. And the other thing is, don't just do LinkedIn once. Be aware of the changes that LinkedIn is constantly making. So a profile is not a static thing, but it should be looked at once a year because it's always you're changing and LinkedIn is changing.
Marissa, one or two closing recommendations for our attendees.
Take advantage of the personal nature of LinkedIn. And remember that even if marketing is not in your job description, by your very presence, you are a member of your company's marketing team. So you represent, and what you do reflects on your company. So be sure that you are interacting on a personal level in a way that is advantageous to your professional goals and your company's goals.
Chris, over to you. Closing recommendations for our attendees.
Amen to both of those, by the way. What I would just recommend, because I know we're running out of time, I would just say this. Take the time to go read the unwritten rules of LinkedIn. It will help you really kind of be on point with how to use the tool. Look that up, just unwritten rules of LinkedIn. It'll be the first thing that pops up.
Awesome. And I'm going to mention, I know a lot of people have been asking in the comments and in the Q&A, are we going to be doing more on this? The answer is yes. In fact, we're planning a webinar in the next month to 6 weeks where we're going to be focusing really on inside sales and sales business relationship development with a focus on HubSpot and LinkedIn. And we're going to dig a little bit more into how to make the process actually work. So stay tuned. In addition, we'll be following up. And if you are interested in having an assessment of your LinkedIn strategy, whether it's professionally for you as an individual or for your business, we will be following up and giving you the opportunity to engage with this team of experts to help make that happen. So again, my thanks to Bruce, to Marissa, to Chris for a spectacular panel discussion. And to everyone, thank you so much. We'll see you on LinkedIn. Have a great day.
Take care, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.